the co-founder of Canoa. And Federico, you can start sharing your screen. Federico is the CEO of the company. He will give us his view on circular and industrialized construction, not least from a startup perspective. And I think you will share a couple of words about how you're sort of building a digital platform for industrialized construction and circularity, and how that can sort of accelerate change in the industry. Now I see your screen is up, and so you're good to go.
Thank you. Thanks for having me and us. Yeah, so I'll give a little bit about the company, but I actually want to go into a case study of one of our sort of first accounts that we're working with, and how some of these ideas translate very directly into things and projects we're doing now. Really to support our mission and to support a lot of the research that we're doing internally. So I'll start by saying this Canoa sort of starts it was born out of this idea that we simply can't continue to, at least myself, I simply can't continue to sort of participate in well, hopefully a client will allow us to do this, or a client will allow us to do that. We wanted to take more ownership of the work that we were doing. And as such, we wanted to create effectively a vehicle, a vessel that will allow us to explore these ideas without needing, let's say, somebody's permission to do it. And so for us, really, affordability and climate change are really the most important topics of early 21st century cities. And we wanted to create a vehicle for us to explore these ideas. Our mission is very specifically to lower the bar for everyone to access healthy and uplifting environments. This is not something that should get stuck. And we just spent a lot of my career doing this, but should get stuck in the sort of upper echelons of cost per square foot, let's call it, but instead something that can become much more available to large quantities of people, really to the masses. We have a significant what I would call sort of like city refactoring problem in the West, where cities that are now that expanded greatly post World War II are now sort of in a big kind of refactoring process, and we're going to begin to see a lot more of that over the next couple of decades. And so, how do we support that? How do we allow people, communities, and cities the ability to effectively sort of very quickly make these changes, at least much more quickly than we're doing today. And so there's a few things that we believe in at the company. First and foremost is we see reuse at different scales, but probably the most important of which is that we really focus on adaptive reuse and retrofit. We don't do greenfield development as a matter of principle. We've not yet endeavored into ground up. That's not necessarily an issue as long as it's land or infrastructure that's already sort of been in place, and there's an ability for us to do something here, to engage with something that's already been built. And so leaving whatever was there, or at least trying to reuse as much of it, for us is a big deal. We also see traditional development as simply just too blunt a tool for some of the needs that we have today. It's one tool. It should simply just not be one of the only tools that we have. And we've seen development over the last 50 years sort of balloon into bigger scale, and highest and biggest use always just became bigger. Well, that I think is a good tool to have in our tool set for some types of problems, but not for every type of problem. And some types of problems require much more surgical solutions, fast solutions, safe solutions, honestly inspiring, really beautiful and high quality solutions as well, but at a much smaller scale. So how do we begin to support that side, that sort of long tail of work? Whereas a lot of people are focused on this sort of giant projects, but there's actually not that many of them. If we see the city and the refresh rate of a city, not in new construction, but just in refreshing a lot of the current spaces they have, the number of what we would call transactions or smaller projects is several order of magnitudes higher than we would see in new construction. So how do we support that part of the industry, that part of the market. So hopefully this works. I want to show a quick video. It's sort of about 10% of the time that I have allotted, so hopefully it does work. But this is one of the accounts we're working with now. It's a company called Reef. Maybe some of you have heard of them already. But quite basically, our task with them is to help them repurpose. They were born as a parking company. They are the largest parking lot operator in North America. And part of the task that they brought us on to help them with is that they had this amazing vision to begin to to see and recognize the fact that over the next 10 or 20 years, car infrastructure is going to be reduced by some percentage. Even if it's a couple of points, that's still millions and millions and millions of square feet in very amazing and well situated locations in center cities and around peripheries. And so how can we begin to reposition those assets, reposition those spaces in a way that helps us now, today in 2021, but also potentially sets the stage for some other sort of more meaningful, let's call it like more blunt tool type of work in the future. And so we're helping them with the near and now, and the story behind this is just incredibly sort of compelling for us, especially considering, and these are studies that have been done by a few universities and others as well. But there's a general consensus that about between 40 and 65% of land area in the sort of top 20 or 30 American cities is giving up to car infrastructure today. And so we don't just have a construction cost issue from an affordability perspective. We have a land cost issue. And part of that is because the land has been squeezed in many different ways. And so there's lots of experts. We can go into detail about sort of densities and all these kinds of things, but there are some other quick wins. There are, and especially now precipitated by things like a pandemic, which has now fundamentally sort of fractured some ideas of work, of future of work, of retail, of last mile logistics, and also of mobility. And so this is one of those, I think, this sort of central tenets that we're going into. So I'll play this quick video.
What if a parking lot was more than a lot? Our cities were designed a century ago, built on outdated ideas for cars, not people. We built our lives around commutes, more cars, more parking. Over time, our cities grew, and so did our questions. Why do we commute for hours each day? Why don't all neighborhoods have fresh food? So we started to rethink things, a greater focus on community and the neighborhood and how we live. And then suddenly, everything changed. With our streets empty and our hearts full, we stopped asking why and started asking why not. What if we killed the commute and focused on where we live? What if a parking lot was more than a lot? What if it were a canvas to help restaurants thrive, to heal us when we get sick, make delivery delightful, a place to bring neighbors together, or to bring the harvest home? A new blueprint for our lives, for our neighborhood, for our cities. Reef, more than a lot. What if a parking...
So, every time I watch that video, I'm super impressed by their communications team. So the task we have at hand with them, and this is by no means solved, but this is, I think, a really great example of how we then go out and sort of work with the rest of the industry, specifically in what we would consider industrialized construction around modularity, deployability, optimization for freight. And so the first big umbrella type of KPIs that we're using to help them deploy a what we would call an adaptable product that is quick to deploy, but it also is adaptable and responsive to the changing needs of different types of neighborhoods, have to do with reusability, optimizing for renewable, biodegradable materials, increasing the amount of recycled and recyclable materials. We're deploying, we have an aspiration for 100% electric, so electric only type of structures. Reducing the percentage of deployment or any increase in demand on virgin materials as much as possible. Obviously, natural ventilation and VOC reductions. These are workplaces for humans. Lots of sort of last mile infrastructure, kitchens, pharmacies, storage and delivery and those kinds of things. And so we want these to be great workplaces that are healthy. And obviously, optimization, reduction on weight and freight optimization, given that many of these things have to be, shippable and deployable. So those are the KPI for a physical product. The KPIs we're using for what a digital product is, we need to track everything. We need to know where stuff is. We organize around a portfolio of sites and locations and these products and components, not per project. So we don't look at, projects are lower sort of task, let's say like data hierarchy for us. The whole portfolio and understanding where stuff is, whether it's actually active or not and live, or whether it's in development for us is more interesting than what each individual product is doing. Obviously, materials intelligence, warranties, insurance, and certifications tracking, compliance, and then understanding use cycles versus end of life, which is really important. How many times can something be reused before it has to go back into a retrofit condition? And how many times does that need to happen before it needs to actually meet its end of life, at which point, due to biodegradability or the use of renewable materials, even that should be able to minimize and potentially even find some downcycling kind of opportunities, which again, we're not there yet, but that's an objective. So we see scales of reuse to be at the building level, again, this sort of adaptive reuse retrofit scale, and then at the product level as well. A modular unit for office to turn a parking lot into a co-working area, or a modular unit for retail to turn a parking lot into a park with coffee shops and all these kinds of things. And obviously, and then at the building scale, it's this used to be a garage and now it's being used for all of these other for what we would call social infrastructure in the near term. So our model as a company is really, we're really hyper-focused on this idea of generating demand for reconfigurable solutions, not because we're enamored with reconfigurable solutions or industrialized construction or modular construction. It's because they solve a very specific problem. And instead of using them to try to supplant something else, something that's been traditionally used, we're trying to see what do these technologies enable us to do? What are the markets that these things enable instead of replace? Completely new markets that we may not have been thinking about before. And so we as much as possible try to focus on, again, this sort of finding new grounds, finding new areas where we can where the use of modular and industrialized solutions makes sense at a really fundamental level. And then we build the technology and partner ecosystem to do this. So I'll be really clear here. Like, there's a lot of companies and people here that do product development and do manufacturing. We won't do manufacturing. We want to partner with people. We want to create the demand for more of this product to come out into the market. So we're more focused on optimizing and automating the deployment of these systems as opposed to in the actual sort of engineering and product engineering of the systems themselves. We sort of understand that there's an ecosystem that's been built up over the last 10 or 20 years that's really amazing, which we feel, frankly, is probably underutilized to a degree. And so we believe that there's a gap there that we can close. And obviously we want to have huge potential impact. So we want to aggregate as much of this as possible and try to get to a point that there's many tens of millions or hundreds of millions of square feet of adaptive reuse and retrofit that we're doing year over year, focused on these sort of edge conditions around very specifically commercial real estate. We're not touching residential, definitely not single home residential, but around sort of new infrastructure on last mile, which is a big area of growth at the moment, adaptable workplaces, adapting old infrastructure, even commercial infrastructure, for new modes of housing. is a big area that's beginning to grow significantly. Retail experiences and obviously human mobility as well. So that's it. I wanted to be fast and furious and respect the time on all of this, but thank you for having us.
Thank you, Federico.